Tonight, the AUKUS deal unveiled. Hundreds of billions to be sunk into nuclear submarines in Australia's biggest defence spend in history, while China warns the deal will fuel a regional arms race, labelling it an expensive mistake. Also tonight, Geelong Premiership player Max Rook to lead a concussion class action against the AFL, and cutting the fat. Households trim their budgets as rate hikes eat into consumer confidence. Good evening, Tamara O'Dine with ABC News. 18 months after the AUKUS pact between Australia, the United Kingdom and the United States was first announced, today we learned how Australia will acquire a new fleet of nuclear-powered submarines. The 30-year deal will cost the country up to $368 billion and is aimed at countering an increasingly aggressive China. The Albanese government says the investment is crucial to maintaining peace and stability in the Pacific. Tonight we'll explore what the deal means for local industry and get political analysis as well as reaction from Beijing. But first, here's Defence correspondent Andrew Green, who is in San Diego for the announcement.
The Commander-in-Chief giving his allies the full American welcome.
I'm proud to be your shipmates.
With one of his country's prized nuclear submarines, the USS Missouri, docked alongside, the President, flanked by the Prime Ministers, revealed the long-awaited details of their AUKUS deal.
The biggest single investment in Australia's defence capability in all of our history.
From 2027, one British Astute-class boat and up to 4 American Virginia-class subs begin regular rotations out of WA. In the early 2030s, Australia will begin buying at least 3 Virginia-class boats from the US, pending congressional approval, with an option to get 2 more if needed. Then, from the 2040s, Australia wants to begin delivering new AUKUS-class submarines built in Adelaide using a British design with an American combat system.
But the ultimate goal isn't just selling subs to Australia, it's developing something new together.
One of the most advanced nuclear-powered subs the world has ever known.
In the mid-2050s, all things going to plan, the Royal Australian Navy will have 8 submarines, at least 3 American and 5 Australian-made. The Virginia-class submarines would start being retired in the 2060s, replaced with more of the new AUKUS models. The cost to Australian taxpayers, hard to fathom, between $268 and $368 billion over the next 3 decades. The British Prime Minister pointing to recent history as reason for the monumental military build-up.
Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, China's growing assertiveness, all threaten to create a world defined by danger, disorder and division.
Nuclear submarines considered part of the answer. Faster and more stealthy than conventional subs, able to stay submerged for months on end. But all 3 AUKUS partners are stressing Australia's nuclear-powered subs won't carry nuclear weapons.
Australia's proud record of leadership in the international nuclear non-proliferation regime will of course continue.
And despite the fractious state of US politics, an assurance from the White House's current occupant.
Mr. President, does this survive a change of administration?
Yes. For sheer ambition, this project is unrivalled in size and complexity for all 3 leaders. So a lot needs to go right if it's even to run roughly to plan. Joe Biden would be 97, Anthony Albanese 77 and Rishi Sunak almost 60 by the time the first new AUKUS sub is due to be delivered. Their collective leadership will be long past by then.
Can I tell them at ease? I'm their commander-in-chief, right?
Yet their legacy, at least in part, will be shaped on the commitments they made here today. Andrew Green, ABC News, San Diego.
China has accused Australia and its allies of triggering an arms race and double standards in choosing to produce nuclear-powered subs. Andrew Green joins us now from Los Angeles. Andrew, how big a risk is there this deal will escalate tensions with China?
Tamara, China was never going to be happy with what was announced today by Australia and its AUKUS partners, and the government was anticipating an angry response from Beijing. But nevertheless, it has come this evening, and through the Foreign Ministry spokesperson, we've heard a furious response from China. It's accused Australia of taking a dangerous and wrong path. But this is language we've heard for many months now, and we can expect that China and the United States and Australia and the United Kingdom will continue to exchange hostile words on the AUKUS partnership.
Now, the Prime Minister is going to fly to the Pacific now. How have Australia's neighbours reacted to the AUKUS announcement?
Well, when this announcement was first made of the new AUKUS partnership 18 months ago, it caught many of Australia's close neighbours by surprise. They felt blindsided and were very angry. The new Albanese government has gone to a lot of effort to prepare the region for what has been announced today. We've seen the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister engaging directly with their counterparts in this region. So many of them feel a little bit more relaxed, though that diplomatic legwork will continue, and we'll see some of that in action tomorrow when Prime Minister Anthony Albanese flies to Fiji. He'll meet his counterpart there. Of course, the Pacific is a region that's had a long-held opposition to nuclear weapons and nuclear proliferation generally.
Andrew Green in Los Angeles, thank you. The AUKUS agreement will create thousands of new jobs, the lion's share of them in South Australia. But under the former French submarine deal, workers there would already be cutting steel, while construction of the first AUKUS submarine is still years off.
A new dawn at South Australia's shipyards.
Today's announcement is very good news for the short term in South Australia. It's massive news for the medium term. And in the long term, it's game-changing news for the people of our state.
A $2 billion upgrade will begin at Adelaide's Osborne facility this year, getting ready for construction of nuclear submarines. The submarine program is expected to create more than 8,000 jobs once it reaches its peak. But that's still 2 to 3 decades away, a long wait for local businesses hit by the scrapping of the French sub deal.
Now we're talking about certainty, but that certainty is a decade away.
It's not just South Australia's shipyards getting an upgrade. $8 billion will be spent on Perth's naval base, which will become the West Coast home of the nuclear submarines from the 2030s. That port will also be getting more frequent, longer visits from US and British boats.
This is a game changer for our nation, and it's a game changer for Western Australia as well.
While WA's HMAS Stirling base will be the West Coast home, the government is yet to confirm whether Port Kembla in New South Wales will be their home in the east. Wherever they're docked, questions remain about how Australia will handle a new nuclear industry. The federal government says Australia won't supply its own fuel, but it does have a responsibility to store it once it's spent.
So obviously that facility will be remote from populations, and today we are announcing that that facility will be on Defence land, current or future.
A waste storage facility is unlikely to be needed for decades because the submarines have long-lasting, sealed nuclear reactors. But given the history of attempts to establish nuclear waste dumps in remote Australia, it's likely to be a politically fraught decision for whichever government has to make it. Leah McLennan, ABC News, Adelaide.
The AUKUS Pact will shape many aspects of the Australian economy for decades to come. It'll require national priorities to be reconfigured and reprioritised, as political editor Andrew Probyn explains.
AUKUS will be a massive national endeavour that'll have significant challenges on the security and economic fronts. To build nuclear-powered submarines, Australia will need technology, skills and a workforce that don't currently exist. And although initial costs are relatively modest, they will ramp up quickly in the 2030s and beyond.
Australia can't afford not to do this, and this is a key investment.
I want to give this commitment to the Australian people today that come hell or high water, the Coalition will support AUKUS.
Bipartisanship's one thing, But in the context of an ageing population, sizable structural budget deficit and huge cost pressures in aged care, health and the NDIS, something's got to give. Big decisions about spending cuts or higher taxes are inevitable. However, they will take courage and a government's preparedness to spend political capital while standing firm against an assertive superpower and Australia's biggest trading partner, China.
And coming up on 7:30 with Sarah Ferguson, Vice Admiral Jonathan Meade explains how the AUKUS deal will transform Australia's Navy.
The government made a clear decision that the region had changed. It had changed for the worse. It had become less stable, more fragile, and we needed a capability that could defend Australia, protect our people and safeguard our economic prosperity.
To the rest of the day's news now, and dual premiership player Max Rook will lead a class action involving dozens of AFL players seeking compensation over the long-term effects of concussion. Lawyers took the case to Victoria's Supreme Court just hours after the league pledged to spend millions of dollars on brain injury research.
Celebrated as a hard-nosed player, Max Rook was often in the thick of the action. He ended his career a two-time premiership hero, but the effects of concussion have been life-changing.
It's incredibly difficult to live with these adverse effects that just aren't who you really are at your core.
Rook claims he suffered permanent injuries due to concussion and negligence of the AFL. He's the lead plaintiff in a class action lodged in Victoria's Supreme Court today.
You have these otherwise strapping, fit-looking blokes who might be crying in front of you within a few minutes of talking to them. It's absolutely devastating.
Dozens of former players are expected to seek compensation.
It's likely to be close to $1 billion.
We haven't been served or seen any action, any papers from the lawyers. We will assess that when it comes through like we would with any claim.
Hours before the action was lodged, the AFL committed to a new plan to tackle the problem. The strategy includes up to $25 million for a long-term brain health study, more education for community football, and a bigger hardship fund for injured players.
What we're looking to do with the long-term study, which will be over a minimum of 10 years, with a big investment from the AFL, is to follow the players from the pathway when they enter our system all the way through their career and post their career.
But experts say the AFL must recognise the link between head knocks and degenerative brain disease.
This is a really important differentiation and a big step that the AFL will need to take if they're going to move on in this issue truly and improve the safety of their athletes.
A big step on an issue that's fast becoming a major headache for the AFL. Tom Maddox, ABC News, Melbourne.
The trial of former Melbourne school principal Malka Leifer has been suspended because the judge presiding over the case has contracted COVID. It means Ms Leifer's trial will now be delayed until at least next Monday. The 56-year-old has pleaded not guilty to 27 sex abuse charges from her time as principal of the Adas Israel School 2 decades ago, when 3 sisters alleged she abused them in secret. After 5 weeks of evidence, the county court trial was close to concluding, but the delay means the jury won't be able to retire to consider its verdicts before next week. Well, after more than half a decade, a ferry operator and a former Australian polo captain have been sentenced over the death of 16 horses. They died during a Bass Strait crossing on a Spirit of Tasmania ferry in 2018. Today, after multiple sentencing delays, government-owned ferry operator TT Line and Andrew Williams were fined thousands of dollars.
On a warm summer night in 2018, after a polo event in Tasmania's northeast, tragedy struck.
16 prized ponies from the Willow Polo Club were discovered dead after travelling from Tasmania to Victoria last week.
It left Australia's horse community shattered.
Without them, there's nothing. There's no polo, there's no business, no reason to wake up in the morning.
18 horses were loaded onto a truck at Barnbougle and driven onto a Spirit of Tasmania vessel at Devonport. It sailed 10 hours overnight to Victoria. The horses weren't checked until the truck had driven off the ferry and was an hour out of Melbourne.
Hundreds of horses go on that boat every year, and that's the first incident I've ever heard of.
I have horses and transport them backwards and forwards with no fear whatsoever.
An investigation was launched and a long wait for answers began. The truck driver and ferry operator were charged for breaching animal welfare laws. Andrew Williams eventually pleaded guilty for his part, but TT Line fought the charges, ultimately losing in court. And today, a sentence years in the making handed down. The magistrate said TT Line was liable for checking the welfare of the ponies and simply did nothing to comply with that requirement. The magistrate recorded a conviction with a $75,000 fine. For Mr. Williams, she accepts he's remorseful for his conduct and acknowledged he has been devastated. He's also been convicted and is ordered to pay a smaller fine, the magistrate saying he failed in his duty to the animals. Monty Boval, ABC News.
Consumer confidence is continuing to drop as higher interest rates spook households. Data from major banks suggests there's growing evidence that consumers are cutting back on spending and more small businesses are feeling the pinch.
Just a 2 kilo piece?
Amna Danui's customers are buying cheaper cuts of meat.
Mostly like mince, cheaper cuts of steak, casserole dishes.
And so your overall spend, is that going down?
It has, it's gone down by 10%. Was it too much?
She's worried that things will get tougher if interest rates keep rising.
Just like everyone else that's got a mortgage out there, we really do feel the pinch.
Down the road, Tony Dar's hours are being cut as furniture sales slide.
Last year I was working full-time hours, now I'm working far less.
Consumer sentiment remains at pessimistic levels, with prospects for the sales of major household items particularly bleak.
If they're not spending in stores like this, we run the risk of, first of all, cutting staff's hours as well as probably closing.
Economist Adelaide Timbrell says that people with savings are still getting out and about.
If people do want some discretionary spending, they're much more likely to choose a holiday over a new piece of furniture.
The latest NAB survey shows that business confidence is now in negative territory and trading conditions are dipping, with the bank forecasting things will get tougher later this year.
Bit of 80s glam gear there.
Mary Gurry has seen every downturn since the 80s and she's preparing for another.
Because there's mortgage stress out there already. But the fact that we've got nearly full employment is helpful.
A measure that is closely watched by the Reserve Bank as it decides whether to hike interest rates again next month. Amelia Terzon, ABC News.
Australian researchers have found similarities in the effects of long COVID and chronic fatigue syndrome on the brain. A study has revealed abnormalities that could explain the symptoms and unlock the key to treatment.
Sue Murphy was a fit and healthy 62-year-old before catching COVID last January. She says her life since has felt like an uphill battle.
You might have a couple of good days and you feel like you're on the road to recovery, and then a new symptom will kick in and you're back to square one again.
Her long COVID symptoms are debilitating. Hospitalised 4 times with heart issues. So short of breath she struggles to climb stairs. Everyday chores leave her tired. She battles regular spells of vertigo and brain fog so severe she's even needed directions to find her own home. It's taking a toll financially and emotionally too.
It's been a really hard journey.
Up to 43% of COVID patients never fully recover, and doctors don't know why. But a world-first study by researchers at Griffith University may be a step closer to people like Sue getting answers. High-powered MRI scans have revealed the same abnormality, a significantly enlarged brainstem, in people with both long COVID and chronic fatigue syndrome.
So this study will fast-track the treatment of long COVID.
A treatment may already exist. It's called naltrexone, an anti-inflammatory medication used for opioid addiction. It's currently being prescribed in low doses by doctors for the off-label treatment of both chronic fatigue syndrome and long COVID, with promising results.
Improves cognition, fatigue and pain of people with ME/CFS and potentially long COVID.
Australia's first clinical trial has been approved and will start as soon as next month. Mackenzie Colohan, ABC News.
Iranian authorities say they've pardoned more than 22,000 people who took part in recent anti-government protests. The months-long uprising was sparked by the death in September of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini while in the custody of the country's morality police. Since then, at least 530 people have been killed and tens of thousands detained as authorities cracked down on demonstrations. The death toll has risen to more than 100 in Malawi and Mozambique after Tropical Storm Freddie pummeled the African nations. There's been widespread destruction across the two countries, with floods and landslides devastating communities. Relentless rain and strong winds are hampering search and rescue efforts. Freddie is one of the strongest storms to hit the southern hemisphere. Well, the shockwaves from the collapse of 2 US banks in 3 days have pounded global bank stocks. The crisis has also fuelled speculation that America's Federal Reserve could pause interest rate hikes.
It's business as usual. That was the message from bank regulators as worried customers gathered outside the headquarters of the failed Silicon Valley Bank in California.
International wires will be able to be sent today as well.
Wires that you would normally be able to process will be processed there at the moment.
The federal government has raced to reassure Americans that the banking system is secure, taking over the bank and guaranteeing all deposits.
We're here to assist with any questions. Branch employees will handle all normal transactions.
I'm going to clear it out and learn my lesson, and I'm not going to put the money all in one place. Like I did here.
In New York, customers flocked to branches of the Signature Bank, which has also collapsed.
Are you worried you won't be able to get your money?
I don't know. Sure, I have to get the money out.
Don't panic. Don't run on it, because everybody loses.
Joe Biden has sought to calm fears and is vowing to protect customers.
Our banking system is safe. Your deposits are safe.
Despite the president's reassurances, it was a volatile day on the markets, with stocks in smaller banks plunging amid fears of contagion. But other stocks rose on hopes the turmoil will force the Federal Reserve to ease up on the interest rate hikes when it meets next week. Small comfort to customers.
We have to meet payroll this afternoon.
Just trying to make it through the day. Barbara Miller, ABC News, Washington.
And there wasn't much comfort for the local share market today, with the collapse of US banks you just heard about causing investors to rethink how high rates will go. Here's David Chow.
The local share market has pretty much wiped out all the gains it's made since the year began. The All Ords finished trading with a steep 1.5% loss, with tech and lithium doing quite poorly. And the smaller banks were a major drag on the market, as it seems investors are still a bit worried about whether their money is totally safe. It is, by the way. So even though US regulators have promised to protect customers who deposited their hard-earned cash in the now defunct Silicon Valley Bank, shareholders of US regional banks were panicking, judging by the huge sell-off we saw overnight. And that pessimism spread to global markets, with big falls across Asia, the UK, but a tiny loss on Wall Street. Speaking of pessimism, investors rushed to buy the US government's safe 2-year bonds overnight, and that caused their yield, or returns, to suffer their biggest plunge in decades. It's now lower than the US Federal Reserve's overnight lending rate, which suggests the market is now betting the Fed is finished with its interest rate hikes, and rate cuts could soon be on the way. And locally, markets are even betting there's a 90% chance of Australia's Reserve Bank pausing its rate hikes next month, and the rest are betting on a rate cut. Meanwhile, the Aussie dollar was a bit weaker at 66.6 US cents, while oil and gold fell, and iron ore prices had a decent jump. And that's finance.
The NRL is still to provide an outcome in the investigation of the racial vilification of Latrell Mitchell from last Thursday. It remained a talking point as the league launched its multicultural round.
Braving the rain for the launch of Multicultural Round. In the absence of current players due to the ongoing pay dispute with the league, some of the NRL's finest were on hand for the celebration. Amid the backdrop, though, of the Stronger Together message for this weekend, was last Thursday's racial vilification of Latrell Mitchell.
No update at the moment. Everyone is doing their job, working through the facts, and then the matter will be resolved once all those facts have been gathered. It's not as cut and dried as what it may appear to be. It's important to move quickly on these matters. It's also important to do them properly and thoroughly.
It's a situation Bulldogs legend Hazem El Masri knows all too well.
It's very tough. Being a goal kicker as well myself and had a lot of sort of kicks out wide. I used to cop plenty of that. It was always uncalled for. You do feel a sense of, hurt.
He's not one, though, calling for lifetime bans for perpetrators.
If it's their first offence and that, sometimes you don't want to just bar them completely from the game. You'd want to sort of maybe get them to do like a community service type of education.
An important issue for all sports in Australia and one close to the heart of legends like El Masri, Willie Mason and Sonny Bill Williams.
The guys here had to learn about Ramadan and ask me the questions and vice versa. Learning about the haka, just respecting one another. I mean, respect is the main thing for me.
Celebrating diversity without prejudice. Daniel Garb, ABC News.
Steve Smith will continue to captain Australia in the one-day series in India while Pat Cummins stays in Sydney to grieve the loss of his mother. India won the Test series against Australia 2-1 after the fourth Test ended in a draw. While that match was on, Sri Lanka's hopes of reaching the World Test Championship final were dashed when New Zealand won a last-ball thriller in Christchurch. It means Australia will take on India in London in June.
The guys are really pumped by it, really excited. We saw India, I think, when they came back out on the field just after New Zealand had won, shaking their hands and what have you. So it's going to be great coming up against India in the final.
Australian boxer Tim Tszyu is hoping for a mid-year fight against the undisputed super welterweight world champion Jamel Charlo in the United States. Last Sunday, Tszyu claimed the interim WBO world title with a technical knockout win over American Tony Harrison. The victory came almost 30 years after Tszyu's father Costa won his first world title. Tszyu spoke to his Russian-based father after claiming the biggest win of his career.
Oh, Dad said, good job, well done. You made a couple of mistakes though. Far out, man. I think it's a big moment for him as well. The goal now is to be the best boxing family ever lived.
Now with the weather, here's Paul Higgins.
And Melburnians always say this is the best time of the year, and on a day like today you can see why. Not too chilly last night, 8 degrees at Omeo, Warrnambool and Westmere, 7 up at Mount Latham Airport. We've had some showers, even a few flashes of lightning over the eastern ranges and in the Otways today, and in the last day you can see there over the Strzelecki's. But most of those showers have avoided the rain gauges. Oyen and Walpiup took the honours today with a high of 33 degrees. It was our warmest day for more than a week. A Melbourne city high of 30.5 at 3:04 this afternoon, and a very pleasant end to the day. It is still 28 outside. Quite a lot cooler though in Geelong. Sydney had a wet Tuesday, more thunderstorms to Queensland and a hot day in the Alice, 7 degrees above average. Now the tail end of a weak cold front has brought some cloud to Western Victoria, and we have jet stream cloud behind it. With a weak trough pushing into Northern Victoria tomorrow, a few showers in our east. This cold front, that one down there, will cross Tasmania early on Thursday. So we're going to have a shower or two in our south on Thursday, especially in the southwest. Hot north winds here on Saturday before a cool change Saturday night into Sunday. Back to tomorrow, Brisbane will have afternoon thunderstorms. Sydney and Canberra will be partly cloudy, and Hobart the chance of a shower. Adelaide will be mostly sunny and blue skies on the way for Perth. Back home, a morning shower or two in Gippsland, then on the eastern ranges popping up during the afternoon. It'll be mild to warm in the south and very warm north of the Divide. Bit of a westerly wind change in the west and afternoon coastal sea breezes. So cloudy and 23 in Wonthaggi, but mostly sunny, and 33 in Shepparton. On the bay, a southwesterly wind 10 knots, becoming south to southeasterly in the afternoon. Well, cloud will move across Melbourne later tonight, and there's a slight chance of a shower. Then after a cloudy morning, the sun should break through in the afternoon. 17 overnight, 26 degrees tomorrow. That's 5 degrees cooler than today, and we'll have light winds. 26 again Thursday under mostly sunny skies. On Friday, morning showers about the Dandenongs, but only a slight chance for the rest of the city. Saturday, a fresh north wind will push push the temperature to 31, partly cloudy again. After a mild Saturday night, 27 Sunday with a cool change during the day, and then more partly cloudy weather, Tam.
Thank you, Paul. That's it for this evening's bulletin. Sarah Ferguson is up next with 7:30.